All right, Patrick,
What's up?
been working all day on this. Thanks for taking some time out to do this on a Sunday just before the Super Bowl. You have been able to put together a detailed timeline. I think that one thing this timeline does is it definitely shows, when you put this all together, that Alex Murdaugh had the ability to have committed these murders. It blows some major holes in his own alibi. So let's take a look at it and dive in real quick. And this timeline is available for download at the bottom of the page so that you can view it too, because there's quite a lot of information here. It's going to take some time for you to delve all in it. But let's talk about the important things. What jumps out at us once you put all this together in a timeline?
I only started back from when they were meeting at dinner, right? So around 7:50 or so, they're eating dinner together. But the big thing is Paul's Snapchat video that we had 4 people put Alex Murdaugh's voice in that video right there at 8:44:49. And so he's in that video, and that puts him at the scene of the crime just minutes before their deaths.
Yeah, and let's talk about how we can kind of scale down where they probably were murdered at. Kind of a grisly thing, but this whole trial is about, when were these people killed and where was Alex Murdaugh during this time? I think 8:44 is really, really important. The videos we all saw in the first week of trial, Alex says over and over again that he was at the house, which is far away from the kennels, about 500 yards away from where the murders happened, that he was back at the house sleeping during this time. Now, his cell phone activity supports that. You can see the red line up there. His phone shows nothing during that time period. Right? It looks like he was laying on the bed with the phone set aside. It's not recording steps. It's not recording anything. But the problem is, go back to 8:44. Right there, we have that Snapchat video from Paul's phone at 8:44 showing that they were all at the kennels, and we heard multiple witnesses say that that is Alex's voice on that recording. Now, how much stock can you put in his alibi? Let's move on to see what else this cell phone information tells us.
Yeah, and I think you start with Paul's cell phone information. He's texting to and from Megan right here. I mean, he's receiving,
and that's
he's
important
reading
because that tells us he's alive.
Yeah. He's sending messages. She's receiving messages. They're texting back and forth. And he receives 2 messages from Megan right here around 8:48 and 39 seconds. Those are read, but they're never responded to.
And that's at what time?
Text from Megan read by Paul at 8:48:29. Second text, 8:48:29, read by Paul. Both texts from Megan are read, but they're not responded to. Paul's phone locks and goes silent forever at 8:49:01.
Okay, so we know that Paul was alive at the moment he sent that last text to Megan at 8:48. They're texting regularly just leading up right up to this. So from 8:44, that's only 4 minutes since we saw him in a Snapchat video.
And it's not even 4 minutes because the Snapchat video ends at 8:45 and 47 seconds.
Good
so
point.
It's literally like 3 minutes.
It's even less than 3 minutes, I think.
Yeah.
So we've got a video that shows him all together less than 3 minutes from where these murders happened. Most
presumably,
likely, right? I mean, we're having to. This is all circumstantial, but he has that cell phone activity, then no cell phone activity at 8:49. We know he was alive at 8:48:39 because he sent a text message at that time. Okay. After that, we don't really know what happened, but he was getting incoming texts right after that he never responded to. So I think the state's going to argue that murder happened around 8:49. They really can pinpoint this with this cell phone data.
You see this over here. His phone locks, and then Rogan, his buddy, is calling him. He was watching Cash, Rogan's dog. That's what the Snapchat video was about. He had an incoming text from Rogan that was never read, and that was at 8:49:35 seconds. So
yeah, I mean, all of this cell phone activity for Paul is happening within a minute, right? Yeah. He's responding, and then suddenly he's not responding, and he's not even opening his phone. So that's why the state, I think, is confident that they can show that most likely these murders happened at 8:49 for Paul. Now, where do we see going on with Maggie's phone?
So Maggie's this blue line, and you see her phone display turns on. The testimony said that this could be due to is receiving a notification, somebody picking it up, her picking up the phone or what have you. So the display turns on. Her phone is unlocked at 8:49:26. Then her phone locks. And then she's just got a series of orientation changes several times. She has recorded steps right here. This is around.
That's important. So that means that either she is moving or someone has grabbed her phone and is moving.
Yeah, and it's only 59 steps, so that's not a lot, right?
And we're still, the time frame here, that's at 8:53.
Yeah.
So we're still within 2 or 3 minutes of Paul's probable murder time.
Yeah. All this is a very short period of time.
Right. And then we also have it's also going to be, I think, possible for the state to argue that Maggie is, if you can take the cursor over to around 8:49, that she's experiencing orientation changes around that same period, that she could have been murdered as within a few seconds of Paul being murdered.
Her phone unlocked, so I would presume that something that she would be the one that unlocks it, you would presume.
You would presume, but that's still in the 8:49:26. We're still at 8:49. I mean, we're still within that minute. Everything seems to be happening at 8:49. Go to the next one.
And so her phone locks at 8:49:31. So,
yeah. So, I mean, it's possible that all of this could have happened within the same
a couple
minute,
of minutes. Yeah.
Within this, and that's definitely possible. Okay. So then we have a series of orientation changes with Maggie's phone. Either she's moving or someone has grabbed her phone and is moving. Yeah. And then we finally have the last orientation change at 8:54. There's that Face ID. Tell me about the Face ID that didn't happen.
At 8:54:34, Maggie's phone activates for 1 second, and the testimony was that this is probably from somebody trying to unlock it or picking it up, and the phone trying to unlock itself by recognizing the face, and it didn't unlock, so obviously it wasn't the right face.
Also, the key thing about 8:53, if you can go back up, remember, I think the state's going to argue that these murders happened both around the minute of 8:49. Yeah. And if someone grabbed her phone, okay, either she was running 53 steps or moving 53 steps at 8:53, or it's very possible that at 8:49 and 35 seconds, her display turns on, experiencing orientation changes that could have been her falling to the ground, etc. Within a few seconds, we have these other orientation changes, and then we have the steps. If someone had grabbed her phone while it was unlocked, it would still be recording this. Like, it wouldn't have gone back into lock mode. But at some point, somebody's going to have to unlock the phone. And we know that Alex knew how to unlock the phone because he unlocked it for the police. But the face recognition, there was a Face ID, and it didn't unlock because it didn't recognize the face. And that's at that 8:53 mark. So I think the state's going to argue that Alex had the phone, was moving around with the phone, went to get in his car with the phone. Now, let's look at Alex's phone and see if it does anything to support or detract from this theory that the state has. What's his phone doing during all this?
Nothing.
Okay.
His phone's doing nothing at all until this time right here.
Which is?
I believe it would be 9:02. Yeah, 9:02 is when and it records 283 steps.
Okay. So.
In a period of 4 minutes.
So he is at 9:02 now. We're probably 10 minutes from the murder time, right? At least 10 minutes. That would have been enough time for him to get on an ATV or something and go back to the house, get his phone where it had been sitting, presumably. He gets his phone, and then we start getting a number of things that are recorded on Alex's phone. The problem for Alex is all of this happens well after the time that he would have been able to commit the murders, that none of his cell phone data helps his alibi at all. And it just shows that he at least had the opportunity to commit these murders.
And there was several minutes of dead space between Maggie's phone activating for a second and doesn't unlock, and him starting to move at 9:02.
In addition to his cell phone data, we also have information from his car. The state had testimony from the electronics in the car that recorded when the car was starting, when it was engaging in any way with Alex's phone. What are we learning from his car in this timeline?
So his car shows that at 9:03, the infotainment system starts booting itself up at 9:03 and 44 seconds. And that could have happened by simply opening the door. And if he had his keys in his hands, and it started communicating. And so the boot up sequence starts up several times. But we see at 9:06, the ignition starts on his car.
Wow. Okay, so 9:06, 15 minutes after these murders presumably happened, according to the state, right? That this is what they're going to argue, that he's in his car and he leaves that property a good 15 minutes after this happened. Could have been enough time for him to clean up. Could have been enough time for him to do lots of things before he goes to his mother's house. So
he was saying that he was asleep and then went to his mother's house.
His alibi was that he was in the house the whole time.
Yes.
And he got into his car and left, presumably from him before these murders took place, because he didn't hear anything. Right. Really, if you tell the cops he didn't hear anything. His alibi is now really incredible at this point, because 8:44, there's a video of him with his voice on it at the kennels. So everything he said to the cops about him being at the house the whole time doesn't mean anything.
Right.
And then now his own cell phone doesn't support his alibi in any way, because his cell phone starts recording after the state says the murders happened, which is supported by the cell phone data from the victims, Maggie and Paul. So big problems for Alex Murdaugh now. Is this going to sink Alex Murdaugh and lead to a conviction now that we've kind of been able to piece all this together?
Yeah. And I think that the part that supports Alex is some of this testimony after the murders. You've got this almost simultaneous action here with him starting the car and Maggie's phone experiencing its final orientation change. And the phone was found a long way from the house, and you would presume that he was at the house, not driving around. I mean, he didn't walk half a mile or a mile down the road to get into his car. So if the orientation change happened from throwing the phone, then that would suggest that there was at least somebody else there. But not only that, there's also this other information that he would be an absolute sociopath to get on the phone with his buddy and just start talking to him about cases, and which is what he did at 9/11. He was talking to Chris Wilson, and they were just talking about cases. Actually, he called Chris Wilson at 9/11, and Chris Wilson called him back at 9:20, and they had a short conversation about some cases that they were working on together. And then Alex ended the phone call when he got to his mother's house. Chris Wilson testified that his conversation with Alex didn't indicate that he was in any kind of heightened stress or was acting unnormal in any way. And you would just think that if you minutes before had committed these violent murders of your wife and son, that you're going to be somewhat stressed or confused or in some kind of heightened state, unless you're an absolute sociopath. And I know that he stole a lot of money and stuff, but I struggle to get from being a thief and being a fraud to being a cold-blooded murderer of your wife and son based on being able to steal from people. That there's a difference there that I don't think the state is completely connected for me.
The defense, it's funny, Chris Wilson, who was one of the people we heard from a day or two ago in the trial, seemed to be a state's witness because he was one of several people who were testifying about the financial crimes that Alex committed and that they had heard about it, were learning about around this time, and really didn't know the full extent of, I think, until much later. But Chris is his best friend, right? And Chris knows him really well. The defense is going to really rely on Chris Wilson. If Alex Murdaugh is going to be acquitted here, I think that there's two people's testimony that we've already heard. Chris Wilson, who was talking to him on the phone right after this would have happened and said he sounded fine. And then the house servant who saw Alex just after this happened confirms that he did come to the house around 9:20, around the period, that time period, and that he had no blood on him, and he didn't seem agitated in any way.
And that would have been around 9:22.
The defense is going to say there's no way that A, he didn't have blood all over him, and that B, that he would have been at least rattled. He seemed totally fine. These are two people that support his alibi because they were talking with him just minutes after the murder. That's going to be a hurdle the state is going to have to overcome. And if you look at this timeline from the defense's perspective, it also supports the defense because while it shows he had the opportunity to do this, it also seems to show that Alex very well could have turned on his phone at 9:02, woken up, grabbed his phone, got into his car a few minutes later and left, and he went to his mother's house. There's nothing about this that says that he had Maggie's phone. All of these things are going to be speculation from the state. I think this allows the state to create a theory of what happened, but it's not beyond a reasonable doubt. And I think the defense is going to be able to use these same timelines to help rehabilitate Alex's alibi, which we know is not consistent, and we know that it was oversimplified by Alex, and it's way more problematic than it sounded for 3 months after these murders happened. But there's still enough there, I think, at this point that the defense has got to feel like this also works in their favor.
They have another conversation at 9:52 or 9:53, and Chris, again, I mean, he said that Alex was acting normal, and they had a conversation about Alex's mother. So, and then there's several other things showing when Alex gets back to the house. You can see the time frame of when he it appears that he would have gotten back to the house, and then he looked around the house. According to him, didn't find Maggie and drove down to the kennels because he knew she was down there. And then you can see all of that. All of that activity, that evidence would suggest that he's calling 911 and everything else. Yeah. This timeline does put everything into a perspective where you can see where the holes are for Alex and where some of the holes are for the state. It comes down to the fact that there are holes for both stories. And that's what makes this case so fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the defense is going to be arguing that this also supports all these other theories that they have, that they're going to be arguing that all these other things that could have happened could also fit within this timeline, right? A second shooter or somebody coming onto the property. I mean, and it's 500 yards away. I don't think that Alex necessarily would be alarmed if he heard gunshots because there were gunshots down by that kennel all the time. They were shooting hogs. They were shooting for fun. All the guns were down there.
Yeah,
it wouldn't be alarming if he heard gunshots, right?
That's right.
That would be an everyday thing.
Yeah.
So, okay. Great work, man. We'll see if there's even more information to put in this timeline in the next week of trial. Again, it is available for download. Please look at it. Please share it. And we'll see what this trial has in store for us in week 3 coming up.
If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button. Make sure you hit the subscribe button so you can get future videos from us.
We'll be following it every day, and we'll be adding videos about every day. So make sure you subscribe so you're notified.